though I was pleased to find it was getting easier with time. But no amount of physical pain I was feeling could compare to the absolute elation I felt to having found someone so remarkable. Though admittedly it wasn't the most logical pairing. I finally felt I had found what the rest of my family had, someone to make our endless existence worthwhile. Unable to resist the urge to feel her blushing cheek again, I brought our hands up together and let the back of my hand lightly brush her skin. The delicate warmth was a sweet reminder that we would find a way to make this work. My eyes must have still been agonized though, because she looked at me reassuringly and whispered. But she made it. I couldn't understand why, but she looked away from me with a sadness I wished I could take away. Yes, I mumbled, wondering if the conversation had gotten too serious for her. Unwilling to let Bella worry over the troubles of our past, I forced my tone to soften. She saw something in his face that made her strong enough. And they've been together ever since. Sometimes they live separately from us, as a married couple, and things are so much more peaceful then. I thought wryly. 48. But the younger we pretend to be, the longer we can stay in any given place. Forks seemed perfect, so we all enrolled in high school. I suppose we'll have to go to their wedding in a few years, again. I laughed. And every time, Alice would insist on putting her in a new dress. Just exactly how many wedding gowns does one girl need? Alice and Jasper, she continued, apparently determined to learn my entire family's history. If she kept this up, maybe eventually she would feel courageous enough to meet them officially. With a smirk, I wondered how awkward that moment would be. Bella, let me introduce you to my family. Oh, don't worry. I've threatened to rip apart anyone who doesn't stay at least 10 feet away from you. Alice and Jasper are two very rare creatures. They both developed a conscience, as we refer to it, with no outside guidance. Jasper belonged to another family, a very different kind of family. I said, trying my best to emphasize the point while discouraging her from asking details. That was one subject I was determined not to burden her with. He became depressed, and he wandered on his own. Alice found him. Like me, she has certain gifts above and beyond the norm for our kind. Really, she said excitedly. But you said you were the only one who could hear people's thoughts. That's true. She knows other things. She sees things that might happen, things that are coming. But it's very subjective. The future isn't set in stone. Things change. I felt my voice catch and I glanced quickly at Bella, once again hoping she could just let it go. As much as I tried to fight it, Alice's two differing yet equally disturbing images took hold of my mind. It was worse than just having heard her talk about it. I had seen them, repeatedly in fact. Somehow that gave them merit, made them more concrete. I had already proven I was strong enough not to let the first come to pass. Bella sitting comfortably beside me, holding my hand, was proof of that. But the image of Bella pale and cold, part of my world in a way I would never allow her to be, felt so uncertain. I wondered how it could ever come to that. I'd spent a great deal of time thinking about it, more than I wanted to, but in the end I'd decided there were only two possible explanations. First, if I were selfish enough to ask it of her to ease my own suffering. It likely would continue to be a constant battle. The closer she wanted to get to me. Still, I couldn't imagine ever succumbing to that, so I thought of the second possibility. If she were on the brink of death and changing her was the only way to keep her with me. That desperate option seemed far more likely. My love for her was already so powerful a force, as much as I hated myself for thinking it. I knew I would act in any way needed not to lose her. So I would have to work very hard to keep her safe, to never let any harm come to her. I smiled at the thought of continuing to be her own personal guardian. Well, not exactly angel, so guardian vampire would just have to do. Bella brought me back to the present with yet another question. Frustrated in my struggle to keep just a few things from her. I wished we were driving my car so we could get back faster. I didn't know how much more of this either one of us could take. What kinds of things does she see? She saw Jasper and knew that he was looking for her before he knew it himself. She saw Carlisle and our family, and they came together to find us. She's most sensitive to non-humans. She always sees, for example, when another group of our kind is coming near. And any threat they may pose. 49. And for that I was eternally grateful. Without Alice's gift, I probably wouldn't ever be able to let Bella out of my sight. Are there a lot of your kind? She asked, obviously surprised. I wondered what her definition of a lot was. It didn't feel like that many to us, but to a human, one rogue vampire was probably a lot. No, not many. I said, hoping she wasn't too frightened by the idea of having us walk among her kind unnoticed. But most won't settle in any one place. Only those like us, who've given up hunting you people, I teased, can live together with humans for any length of time. We've only found one other family like ours, in a small village in Alaska. We lived together for a time, but there were so many of us that we became too noticeable. Those of us who life differently tend to band together, and the others? She asked. She was trying to mask it, but I knew it was scaring her to think about it. I was thankful to finally be pulling into her driveway, hoping that once inside we could talk about more pleasant things. Like our day together. And hopefully our endless days to come. Nomads, for the most part. We've all lived that way at times. It gets tedious, like anything else. That was putting it mildly. It was enough to drive you mad, never having a home, never feeling settled. But we run cross the others now and then, because most of us prefer the north. Why is that? Did you have your eyes open this afternoon? I smirked at her. Do you think I could walk down the street in the sunlight without causing traffic accidents? There's a reason why we chose the Olympic Peninsula, one of the most sunless places in the world. It's nice to be able to go outside in the day. You wouldn't believe how tired you can get of nighttime in 80-odd years. It was nice to finally be honest about just how long I had been wandering around in this miserable existence. Maybe it would help her understand how special she truly was, why she had so drastically changed everything. So that's where the legends came from, probably. Yeah, that and bored Hollywood writers who got paid way too much to think up absurdities about the supernatural. Even if they knew the truth about us, it probably wouldn't stop them from inventing even more myths and legends to try to entertain the people. And Alice came from another family, like Jasper. No, and that is a mystery. Alice doesn't remember her human life at all. I sighed and wondered why Alice's non-existent memory seemed more troubling to the rest of us than it did to her. Maybe because we were all clinging to whatever part of our humanity we could remember, and we couldn't understand how she was so content, only knowing this way of life. And she doesn't know who created her. I continued. She awoke alone. Whoever made her walked away, and none of us understand why, or how. He could. If she hadn't had that other sense, if she hadn't seen Jasper and Carlisle and known that she would someday become one of us, she probably would have turned into a total savage. Thankfully, at that Bella's stomach growled loudly. I had to laugh because here we were talking about vampires and our history, and Bella's body seemed to be trying to remind her she was human. I'm sorry. I'm keeping you from dinner. I sighed, reluctant to let her go. I reminded myself the sooner I let her have dinner and get to bed, the sooner I could be with her again. I wondered what 50 dreams would have after a day like today. I hoped the beauty overshadowed the nightmarish things she'd had to learn about. I wanted only peaceful dreams for her, always. I'm fine, really, she said. She seemed as unwilling to leave as I was. A part of me wished she knew I was never far away. I've never spent much time around anyone who eats food. I forget, I want to stay with you, she said firmly, shocking me by being so straightforward. Usually I had to guess at her feelings toward me. It was wonderfully enjoyable to hear her speak so honestly. Can't I come in? I asked, suddenly excited by the idea of actually being invited in. Sneaking around did make me feel somewhat guilty. Not guilty enough to stop, of course, but still. Would you like to? Would I like to? What kind of question was that? Although, she seemed to be trying to remain nonchalant, so I would attempt the same. Yes, if it's all right, I said casually, and in the same second I was already out of the car opening her door for her. Right. Nonchalant, very human, she said with a grin. It's definitely resurfacing. Along with a tidal wave of emotions I'd never had the pleasure of feeling even in my human life. I loved the way she kept glancing up at me as we walked together. Not only was it adorable, but it also made me feel a strange kind of warmth from deep inside me, almost like when I touched her. It made me want to tell her everything, all the times I'd watched her, how amazing she was even when she was asleep. It probably wasn't the best idea, but I couldn't help myself. I took a couple of quick steps, beating her to the door and opened it for her. I took a deep breath. Because of course she would put the pieces together. The door was unlocked. She asked skeptically. No, I used the key from under the eave. She walked through the door and turned the light on, looking at me warily. This may have been a mistake. I was curious about you, I said, trying to sound like it was no big deal. You spied on me? She asked, attempting to sound furious. Yet there was a little flicker of a smile playing at her lips, and it encouraged me to continue with my confession. What else is there to do at night? For the first time all day, she didn't push for any more information. Instead she turned and headed toward the kitchen, still invigorated by the knowledge that I could really be myself around her. I flew past her and sat down before she was even halfway down the hall. I watched her curiously as she heated up a plate of leftovers. The smell was revolting, so for the first time I actually willed myself to focus on her sweet aroma, trying to get past the burn and really take it all in. I was happy to find it didn't pain me nearly as much as it had even a few hours ago. Perhaps I was growing desensitized. That was an encouraging thought. So encouraging that I almost didn't hear her when she spoke again. How often? She said softly. Ah. Of course she wasn't letting it go. She'd just been looking for something to distract her so she could again act completely uninterested. 51. I muttered, buying a few seconds to figure out how best to phrase my answer. How often did you come here? She asked it like it was past tense. I almost felt bad for correcting her. Almost, I come here almost every night. The only exception being when I was away hunting, and even those trips I'd been cutting short as of late. She turned and looked at me incredulously. Why? She asked, she voice a full octave higher than normal. I tried not to smile too widely. You're interesting when you sleep. You talk. I sighed. About me. No, she shrieked, and instantly I wished I'd never brought it up. Her face was the darkest shade of red I'd ever seen and she was clearly mortified. I didn't understand what she was so embarrassed about. Whether dreaming or awake. She was divine. Are you very angry with me? I asked, hoping she'd forgive me for this as easily as she'd forgiven what I considered far more horrendous sins. That depends. She gasped, her voice still nowhere near normal. On what you heard. Understanding what she must mean. I rushed to her side. After admitting shamelessly just how deeply I cared for her, I couldn't fathom why she was so humiliated by the thought of me hearing a few of her unconscious thoughts about me. Besides, there were never any confessions of love, as much as I wished I could be so lucky, only occasional mentions of my name. And asking me not to leave. Don't be upset. I pleaded, lowering my face so I could look her in the eye. More so than usual, she looked very small as she watched me shyly. You miss your mother. I told her gently. You worry about her. And when it rains, the sound makes you restless. You used to talk about home a lot, but it's less often now. I wanted to tell her how happy it made me that the closer she and I became, the less she mentioned Phoenix, once you said. It's too green, I remembered with a low chuckle. Anything else? She asked. She was going to make me say it. You did say my name. I replied calmly, though inside I felt like I was going to burst at the memory. A lot. She sighed. How much do you mean by a lot, exactly? I asked, trying to avoid the question. Not so much for her sake but because I was suddenly a little embarrassed by the fact that I knew the exact number. Oh no, she moaned, dropping her gaze to the floor. I felt terrible for having upset her so much, so I pulled her into me and held her gently. I let my hands tangle in her hair as I breathed in her luscious scent. In keeping with my desensitization theory, I noticed there was almost no pain at all. I was caught up in how floral it was. Pleasant and warm, just like everything else about her. I brushed her hair back from her face and lowered my lips to her ear, letting them barely touch her as I whispered. Don't be self-conscious. If I could dream at all, it would be about you. And I'm not ashamed of it. 52. I felt her relax into my embrace, finally reaching her arms around me and squeezing back. I heard Charlie's thoughts a few seconds before she heard him pull into the driveway, and she tightened her grip on me. Should your father know I'm here? I asked, already sure I knew the answer. I'm not sure, she said uncertainly. I smiled at the thought that she still wasn't ready to let me go. Another time then, I said, disappearing up the stairs to wait for her. Edward, she whispered loudly, and I just laughed. When would she learn? I was never far away. I stood in the hallway outside her bedroom. oddly reluctant to go in without her permission even though I'd been doing so for weeks. It was different though. Now that she knew, I felt a pang of worry that maybe she would ask me to stop coming. As much as I hated the thought of missing that time with her, if she really felt strongly about it, I would respect her wishes. I listened to her and Charlie talk idly about the day, wondering how it was possible he didn't notice the obvious excitement in her voice as she spoke. Finally I heard him say, "You look kinda keyed up." I laughed under my breath as I imagined the blush that must have rushed to her cheeks. A few moments later he started asking her about boys. I snickered again as I heard her insist that none of the boys had caught her eye. Charlie was a bit too much like his daughter in that he couldn't just let things go. He insisted on asking about that horrid Mike Newton and I felt the familiar twinge of jealousy. Logically, I knew there was no reason for it, after all Bella had spent the day with me. Holding my hand, staring into my eyes, learning all there was to know about me. Yet the feeling still crept in. Irrational as it was one aspect of feeling human again that I was not particularly enjoying. Eventually they said their good nights, and not wanting to startle her when she reached the top of the stairs, I decided meeting her in her room was best. It was wrong, I know, but when I saw her bed I couldn't resist laying down on it. I stretched out with my feet hanging off the edge and waited for Bella. She shut the door louder than I thought was necessary and went straight to the window, not even noticing me on her bed. She called my name frantically into the darkness and I laughed quietly at her. Did she think I was hanging out in the trees? Not that I hadn't done that before. Yes, I said slyly, and she turned around startled. Oh, she cried, lowering herself to the floor. She wasn't usually this jumpy. Maybe the stress of the day was finally starting to sink in. I'm sorry. I tried to sound sincere, but she just looked so cute sitting there, nearly hyperventilating on the floor. Just give me a minute to restart my heart, she was so beautiful I couldn't wait any longer. I wanted her beside me again. So I sat up and reached over to help her up. She felt so fragile as I lifted her onto the bed next to me. Why don't you sit with me? I said, taking her hand. How's the heart? You tell me, I'm sure you hear it better than I do. I laughed because she was right. I knew the sound of her heart better than any other sound in the world. I'd follow it anywhere. Can I have a minute to be human? She asked when her heart had returned to normal. 53. Certainly, I said. Just happy she didn't seem at all uncomfortable with my being in her room. On her bed, with her father downstairs. Stay, she ordered, and looked at me with stern eyes. I fought the laughter that was threatening to escape. Not wanting to embarrass her again. Yes, ma'am, I answered, freezing where I sat. She hurried off to the bathroom and I allowed my mind once again to run through all that had happened that day. I'd been so worried that things would go badly, it didn't seem possible that it was really all behind us, the most difficult test passed. It wasn't so much that I truly believed I would hurt her. I'd like to think I never really thought that possible, though certain nagging thoughts told me otherwise. But there had most definitely been the possibility of me running away if it became too much to handle. She probably never would have forgiven me if I'd left her stranded out there and had to send Carlisle to go get her. Although knowing Bella, even that might not have been beyond her ability to forgive. I was impatient for her to return and I questioned how long a human's nightly routine could take. Eventually I heard the shower start and I tried very hard not to think about the warm water cascading over her soft skin. Instead I made myself focus on Charlie's muffled thoughts. Though they weren't clear, they were obviously about Bella. Naturally he was worried about her. He shifted back and forth between vague concern that she didn't seem interested in dating, and wondering if she was actually very interested but hiding it from him. After several blurry minutes of sifting through his mind, I heard him go outside, followed by the distinct sound of battery cables being detached. I laughed and rolled my eyes. Finally I heard the water shut off, and a few minutes later Bella told Charlie good night again, likely attempting to emphasize the fact that she was going to bed. She raced up the stairs and bounded back into the room, looking over at me expectantly like she thought I would have changed my mind and run off. I wish she could understand that nothing short of her kicking me out herself could make me leave. I was hopelessly addicted to her. When she squinted through the darkness and saw that I hadn't moved, her eyes lit up and she flashed my favorite adoring smile at me. I returned the expression warmly, as I started to take in her appearance. I don't know what I had been expecting, but her old t-shirt and worn-out sweatpants most certainly weren't it. Nice, I said with a grin. She cringed. So I quickly added, "No, it looks good on you, thanks," she said quietly, shuffling over to sit beside me again. I was actually glad she hadn't troubled herself with trying to impress me. I loved every inch of her, just the way she was. There was no need to change anything about her normal pattern just because I was now allowed to be a part of it. I was curious though, when she seemed so anxious to spend more time with me, why she had bothered with such an in-depth process. "What was all that for? Charlie thinks I'm sneaking out," she said knowingly. "Oh," I said, thinking about her currently non-working truck. "Why, apparently. I look a little overexcited." She rolled her eyes, but her blush always gave her away. Overexcited was exactly what she was. I loved that our day together had had that effect on her, though I hoped she'd be able to relax. 54, enough to get a good night's sleep. I was anxious to see where her dreams would take her tonight. I cupped my hand under her chin and lifted her eyes to meet mine. "You look very warm, actually." I sighed, leaning in to touch my cheek to hers. Now that I knew how nice it felt. I missed her warmth on my skin when it wasn't there. Unconsciously I let a low escape as I breathed her in. As she sat silently letting me caress her face and take in her heavenly scent. I wished more than ever that I could know what she was thinking. Did she still think I needed her to be still? Would she ever be able to reach up and touch my face in return, pull me closer to her and make the moment even more perfect? "It seems to be much easier for you now, to be close to me," she whispered, still not moving an inch. "Does it seem that way to you?" I asked, grinning as I slid my nose to her jaw. I brushed her hair back and lightly kissed her below her ear. It was the softest little patch of skin and I wished for a second I could taste it on my tongue. Much easier," she sighed, letting her eyes flutter closed. It had been getting easier every second we were together, either because I was getting used to her, or because every moment I loved her more seemed to strengthen my resolve. I let my fingers trace down the side of her neck and across her collarbone. "So I was wondering," yes, I asked, pleased that I seemed to be distracting her so thoroughly. I really had no idea what I was doing. I was just acting on what felt right, and at that moment touching every inch of her skin seemed right. "Why is that? Do you think?" I laughed, because it had been such a surprise to me that I really didn't think I could explain it right. Everything had been so much simpler when it came down to just Bella and I, between the force of my initial reaction to her and the endless mocking of my brothers. I think I'd convinced myself it was impossible for us to be together. At least not without a constant, unrelenting pain assaulting me. The fact that I was now able to relax around Bella, to enjoy being close to her, to feel pleasure rather than agony from her nearness, was a gift I didn't feel I could possibly deserve. Finally I answered her with the simplest of all possible explanations. "Mind over matter," I said with a small laugh, my lips just barely touching her. I let my breath tickle her neck and she shivered. Without warning she pulled away from me and my breath caught, fearing I'd done something to upset her, though I couldn't think of what. As she backed away, her wet hair fell down around her face and her pulse started to race. Against my will I felt my jaw tighten as adrenaline once again made her blood altogether too delicious. Still, I couldn't feel any lapse in my control. Just a return of the scorching pain from earlier. It was a very small price to pay for being this close to her. Did I do something wrong? I finally had to ask. No, the opposite. "You're driving me crazy," she said, her breath almost gasping. I put her words together with her body's reaction and suddenly felt very pleased with myself. 55. "Really?" I smiled, wondering how I'd managed to figure out this whole closeness thing so quickly. "Would you like a round of applause?" she said, sarcasm dripping from her voice. It just made my grin widen. "I'm just pleasantly surprised," I explained. "In the last 100 years or so, I never imagined anything like this. I didn't believe I would ever find someone I wanted to be with. In another way than my brothers and sisters. And then to find, even though it's all new to me, that I'm good at it. Being with you." My voice and my mind trailed off at the same time while I thought of more ways I'd like to try to drive her crazy. "You're good at everything," she said, still looking slightly irritated, though amusement was definitely starting to win out. I just shrugged and she laughed. It felt so good to laugh with her, to feel so normal for once. But how can it be so easy now? This afternoon, it's not easy, I said, remembering how quickly and unexpectedly the fire had returned. I knew better than to let my guard down, and I certainly didn't want her to forget for 1 second that she was sitting inches away from a vampire. She had to maintain some level of control over herself. I'd learned the necessity of that by her response to my kiss and the nearly unmanageable thirst it had ignited. I decided the best way to make her understand would again be total honesty. It was difficult to admit how much things had changed, how different I'd felt this morning compared to how I felt now. Still, she had a right to hear the truth. But this afternoon, I was still undecided. I am sorry about that. It was unforgivable for me to behave so, Bella, in all her compassion. Didn't let me agonize for even 1 second over my confession. Not unforgivable, she said, looking deeply into my eyes to assure me. I'd done nothing to deserve that kind of affection. Thank you. I smiled, though it felt insufficient. You see, I wasn't sure if I was strong enough, I said miserably. My fingers twitched and I knew I needed to feel her again to get through what I was about to say. I brought her hand up to my face, relishing in her smile and gentle touch. And while there was still that possibility I might be overcome, I sighed, taking a meaningful breath of the sweet scent coming from her wrist. I was susceptible. Until I made up my mind that I was strong enough, that there was no possibility at all that I would that I ever could, I couldn't even think the word anymore. While she sat there in all her beauty and innocence, it was physically painful to think about any harm ever coming to her. I wanted to wrap her up in my arms and tell her how much I needed her soft, warm, perfect body and her adoring eyes. It was beyond any need I'd ever felt. It was confusing and terrifying and wonderful. So there's no possibility now? She asked, raising one eyebrow. Mind over matter, I assured her, trying to convey everything I was feeling through my smile. Wow, that was easy, she teased, and a huge laugh escaped my mouth. Easy for you, I said, touching her nose to emphasize the word. She giggled at the gesture and I rolled my eyes at her. 56. Uninvited. Alice's visions of Bella's future returned to my mind. I quickly ran over the 2 possibilities again. I'd basically decided never to leave Bella's side long enough for anything to hurt her, and I knew no amount of suffering on my part was worth Bella giving up her life, her soul. As confident as I felt from today's success, I couldn't pretend I wasn't worried that I might someday still be overcome in a moment of weakness. It seemed absurd to imagine I could let my control waver like that, but then I remembered the intensity of my need as she clutched me to her, when I could still taste her on my lips. I'm trying, I said, my face and voice abruptly melancholy. If it gets to be too much, I'm fairly sure I'll be able to leave. She glared at me. I should have known better than to talk about leaving with her. And it will be harder tomorrow, I said, thinking about my theory as to why it was so much easier now than this afternoon. I've had the scent of you in my head all day, and I've grown amazingly desensitized. If I'm away from you for any length of time, I'll have to start over again. Not quite from scratch, though. I hoped. Though I didn't plan on being gone for long enough to find out. Don't go away, then, she pleaded, sounding a little bit childish but also undeniably sweet. I wanted her to want me, to need me there with her. That suits me, I grinned. Bring on the shackles, I'm your prisoner, and I couldn't resist. I reached over and locked my fingers around her wrists, gently but firmly. I wouldn't say it out loud for fear of scaring her away, but I wanted her to belong to me like I had so completely given myself to her. We laughed quietly together, the hopeful atmosphere returning to us again. You seem more optimistic than usual. I haven't seen you like this before. Didn't she understand yet? This day had changed everything. And every second I spent loving her more and more made it all seem that much easier. Isn't it supposed to be like this? The glory of first love, and all that. It's incredible, isn't it, the difference between reading about something, seeing it in the pictures, and experiencing it. I thought of Carlyle before Esme. Rosalie before Emmett. I'd seen the way finding their perfect partner had changed them, but still I'd never really been able to imagine what it would feel like. I'd counted myself as the outcast, the unlovable. destined for whatever reason to walk alone forever.